Hey guys, welcome back to a very special movie review episode of the Chuckload of Comics show. This week's movie, the Tom Hanks film, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. If this is your first time to the Chuckload of Comics channel, welcome. Click that subscribe button. Join us here every Sunday for all the fun. Joining us here to talk about the film, two very, very special guests. Shauna over there in the director's seat. How's it going over there, Shauna?
It's going great. Thanks for always having me on this wonderful show.
We couldn't do it without you, but a very special guest joining us here for the second time on the Chuckload of Comics show. A woman who actually spent some time at on the set of Mr. Rogers once. We'll get into that in just a second. But the lovely, vivacious, and young, my mother, Sheila Lindsay. How are you doing?
Hey, I'm doing fine.
You doing good?
Yeah, I am. You enjoying your life?
I am. We had a really good time at Mr. Rogers at Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood yesterday. So a little bit about what the movie is. The movie, Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, tells the story of a reporter by the name of Lloyd Vogel, who gets tasked with a job, a very small puff piece, a 400-page puff piece for Esquire magazine covering Mr. Rogers. Well, Lloyd very reluctantly takes the job. He didn't want to do it. He's more of a hardcore reporter. He didn't want to do this little puff piece. But as he meets Mr. Rogers, he gets this fascination for Mr. Rogers. And what started out as a 400-page puff piece by the end of the film turns into a 15,000 cover article, massive, massive thing. What surprised me a lot about this film, everybody says, oh, it's that Tom Hanks Mr. Rogers movie. Really, the movie is so much more than that.
Right?
It's not just about Mr. Rogers. It's really more a story about this reporter, Lloyd Vogel, and how Mr. Rogers changed his life, helped him with his relationship with his father, his relationship with his wife and newborn child. And he becomes just obsessed in the best possible ways with this, what he says is the nicest guy he's ever talked to, Mr. Rogers. Absolutely love this film. I give it an A. Sheila, I want to throw it over to you. Is this the movie that you thought it was going to be? Did it surprise you in any way? And what are your general thoughts about the movie?
You know, I thought it was going to be more about the show of Mr. Rogers, but it had plenty about that, but it was really the story of this man who met this wonderful
Yeah.
guy,
Lloyd, yeah.
you know. And so it's a different take on Mr. Rogers, but you get deep into Mr. Rogers' character,
Yeah.
and who he was.
It was interesting because, like we said, you know, everybody going into this thinks that this is the Mr. Rogers movie, and it's really not. Tom Hanks wonderfully plays Fred Rogers. I mean, you almost lose yourself in the character. You almost think you're seeing just the way the way he talks and his mannerisms. Tom Hanks does a bang-up job, but honestly, I would consider Tom Hanks more of a supporting cast member of this story than almost a star, which is interesting. Shauna?
Yeah.
I want to get your thoughts on the film. Were you surprised? Is this the movie you thought it was going to be? What did you think?
It was not the movie I thought it was going to be at all. I mean, like you just said, I thought we've been calling it the Mr. Rogers movie. It's Tom Hanks doing Mr. Rogers, but that's not at all what it was. I mean, you just put it perfectly. He's more like a supporting character, which, by the way, I think is good because even though he portrays Mr. Rogers very well, you might get tired of it after a while. I don't know. I thought it was great though. It surpassed my expectations. It just wasn't what I expected.
Yeah, really special film. I mean, I think we all liked it. I mean, right off the bat, we all really enjoyed it. Sheila, I want to go to you because you actually have a pretty interesting story about when you were a girl. You actually visited the set of Mr. Rogers. No, it's not a long story, but you kind of tell us a little bit about that story of when you actually went to Mr. Rogers' neighborhood.
Yeah, my Girl Scout troop in Altoona, Pennsylvania took a trip to Pittsburgh, which was 2 hours away, and we went to see How the West Was Won, and after the movie that evening, we went to see the taping of this local television show at WQED, and it turned out to be Mr. Rogers, and it's amazing that I didn't put those two together until the first movie about Mr. Rogers came out a couple years ago. And then I remembered, oh, I was at that set. I remember that. It was very much like they portrayed in this movie, A Beautiful Neighborhood, with Mr. Rogers behind the scenes doing the puppets and the lady. I forget her name, but the lady.
Yeah, the princess, what's her name?
I know. I always forget her name too.
And she was quite a young lady. This was before they were syndicated. This was just a local Pittsburgh show. And just as a little trivial pursuit question, Michael Keaton was from Pittsburgh, and he worked for Mr. Rogers at that same time period.
I've seen pictures of that of Michael Keaton on the set of Mr.
Yeah.
Rogers back when he was really young.
Right, and
That
of
is too
course I
funny.
love Michael Keaton, but anyway,
Was Michael Keaton there when you went?
no, I mean I don't know, I don't know.
Maybe he was nobody at that point.
But I'm just glad I was got to be there.
Yeah.
But let me say this about Mr. Rogers: when my kids were growing up, when you were growing up, he was on television. But to be honest with you, Mr. Rogers was never cool.
No.
You know,
Yeah,
I would
good point.
never call him cool. He was, almost embarrassing. He was so nice. And then now I think it's wonderful that these movies have come out to be a tribute to him, to show there was so much more depth to him than just what we were perceiving as adults. It was not a show for adults.
Mm-hmm.
It was a show for children, and he spoke directly to children, which took on a whole different.
They touch about that in the movie, which is really nice because I mean, just another thing that Tom Hanks does really well in this film is he almost plays a therapist to Lloyd Vogel, and he talks to him. He even busts out the puppets at some point, and they're sitting on the
Right.
couch, and he's puppet talking to this journalist, and he connects to him. He had the ability to connect with children, connect with adults, change people's lives, just being himself. Actually, at the beginning of the movie, he talks about the guy Lloyd, the reporter, thinks that there's two. He thinks that Mr. Rogers is playing a character. He's like, no, I don't want to talk to Mr. Rogers. I want to talk to Fred. And Tom Hanks is like, it's the same guy. And so he slowly, as the movie progresses, you realize, wow, this is the same guy. He's the same in front of the camera as he is behind the camera. Really, really love the film.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'd give it an A. It's a wonderful holiday film. So should you go check it out? Absolutely. Very family safe. I think you're really going to dig it. It does get a little weird there somewhere in the middle, though.
Definitely.
There's this one point in the middle where where Lloyd becomes very obsessed, and it's a strange scene where he starts seeing Mr. Rogers everywhere, and he starts seeing Mr. Rogers in weird spots. And,
Right.
But aside from that weird little spot, I mean, I thought it was a fantastic film.
Yeah.
A+ in my opinion.
Something else that was really cool was there was one scene in the movie where they actually had Mr. Rogers, like in real life, his actual wife, the actual cast members, they were
Yes.
all in a restaurant together, and that just gave me goosebumps. It's like that
Yeah.
was so cool that they wanted to do that and that they thought to do that.
Yeah, that's
Right.
the restaurant
That was really
scene
neat.
you see in the trailers where Lloyd's sitting across from Fred and they're talking and they have a moment of silence to think about all the people that have
Right.
influenced them in lives. And the camera pans around the restaurant. It's all the actual people who worked. If you saw the documentary, you'd recognize a lot of the faces that are in that
Right.
diner. Really, really cool scene. Very thoughtful, very good script. One last thing, because we could talk about this movie forever. You got something to say?
Yeah, I do.
Okay.
I took away from this movie things that I'm going to be thinking about for a long time. One of the things is that I saw an interview of Tom Hanks about this movie, and they were asking him, what did you learn from portraying Mr. Rogers? And he said, I learned to slow down, take the time to listen, really listen to people, and plug into the moment, into that one individual person instead of all the stuff that always goes on in any conversation. And so I thought that was good. He took something significant away from it that he said changed his life. And what I took out of it was they talked about, his wife talked about in the movie how when he prayed for people, that he prayed specifically for people by name.
Yeah,
And
they
there's
show that a lot in the
scene-
film.
There's a scene in there where he's on his knees by his bed praying for people, and he's not going into these long, detailed prayers. He's simply quietly
Naming
bringing up
names.
a name.
Yeah, that was
Just
really
a
cool.
name.
And what I liked about that scene is that he didn't just say Lloyd's name. He said Lloyd's name. He said Lloyd's wife's name. He said Lloyd's father's name. He said Lloyd's kid's name. And it was like he had a heck of a list and a good memory for names at prayer time.
Right, but I really think that's going to impact my prayer life
Yeah.
because I'm a talker, I tend to go into great detail with God, and I'm not sure that's always necessary.
Yeah,
just
he's a busy
name.
man.
Just a name.
Yeah.
Just bring him up to God's, recollection, and so I took a significant thing away from this.
That's
film.
awesome, man. I would really recommend you guys go. So one last thing I want to say about the film that I thought was really neat. They bookended it. They started out the film as like the opening shot of Mr. Rogers, and it starts out that way and they end it the same way. It was really neat, really cool script, really cool editing. Yeah, really loved it, guys. So Let us know in the comments section, have you seen Mr. Rogers? It's not Mr. Rogers, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. What did you think about it? What did you think about our review? Sheila, I want to thank you for being here.
You're welcome. I think that a lot of people are going to get zippered red sweaters for Christmas this year.
Just like that.
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised one bit.
Yeah.
So, guys, thanks a lot for watching a movie review. Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. If you liked it, click the subscribe button. Join us here every Sunday for all the fun. And that's about it, guys. Have a fantastic week, fantastic holiday season. We'll see you here next time.
Merry Christmas.
Bye-bye.